Hello, and welcome to Jeremy Davis Books. I'm Jeremy Davis. This is the second video that I am posting for this channel, and so I thought I would do a top 10 favorite books of all time list to sort of help everybody get to know me and my taste. So this is my top 10 favorite novels. They're not ranked. I tried to rank them, but it's just not going to happen. Every time I tried to put one above the other, it just really made me sad. I love them all in so many different ways for so many different reasons, and I just can't choose which one's better. I may get better at doing that as I make more of these lists, but who knows. So anyway, let's get started. My top 10 favorite novels of all time. Starting with good old John Steinbeck, East of Eden. Now, I've read a lot of John Steinbeck. I love his writing. I don't see words when I read Steinbeck. I see the setting. I see the characters. I see what they're doing. I see the whole picture. You know, it's like I don't know, when you see a painting, you're not seeing the individual brush strokes. You're seeing the whole thing, and that's sort of what happens. I see it like it's a movie. It's really crazy. No other book of John Steinbeck's does that better than East of Eden. It's an epic story that follows a couple of generations of two families mainly in Salinas, California. One of these families is actually John Steinbeck's family. It's who he comes from, the Hamiltons. But it's not a memoir. The other family, the Trask, that's total fiction. And even the stuff about the Hamiltons, I'm fairly sure is mostly invented. However, the influence of Salinas, California is all over this thing. It makes it familiar, it gives it authority. It feels like you've lived this life. It feels like as you're reading it, you're remembering what happened. As I said, it's not a memoir, but that doesn't stop Steinbeck from hopping in every once in a while to sort of pontificate on good and evil and our place in it and how we can choose what we are. A huge theme of this book is the idea that there is good and evil in all of us. We all have the capacity to do good or to do evil, to be kind or to be horrible or to be violent or gentle. We all have those things, and it's up to us to choose which way we go, which way our life goes. It's incidentally, this book is also the first book that my wife and I read together, so it has a special place in my heart. And we ended up loving the setting of it so much that we got married, not in Salinas, we got married in Monterey, but we got married in the area. So, on to the next one, Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Now, this is another epic. It's about a woman who has everything and is happy with nothing. You love her and you hate her. You empathize with her and you are absolutely annoyed with her. You understand why she's unhappy while also not understanding what her problem is. It's crazy to be so connected to someone like that, to have such a duality of feelings about them, to totally empathize with them, but totally hate them as well. It's really crazy, and a lot of the characters are like that in this. It also has my favorite final line of all time, but don't skip to the end. You have to read the whole book for it really to pay off. Next up, I don't only read epics. Chronicle of a Death Foretold by Gabriel Garcia Marquez is something like 122 pages, 120 pages. This is an amazing marvel of tension, especially when you consider that you know how it's going to end. In the title, it tells you the death is foretold, and after the first line, you know who it is that dies. An unnamed narrator comes back to his home village to sort of piece together the events of the day that a friend of his was murdered. And he goes around interviewing everybody for their memories of what happened that day, and everybody's memory is different. The accounts are very conflicting, and you get to know these people by how their accounts of the day rub up against each other and conflict and agree sometimes. By the end of it, you get a beautifully clear image of this village and the people in it, and a clear-ish idea about what happened. It's so good, and it doesn't take long to read. It's really, really, really great. What's next? Cloud Atlas. Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. This is something special. It's unique. If you don't know anything about this, it's 6 stories that are told one after the other, but they're split in half. And they go through time. I think the first one is in like the mid-19th century, and then it jumps forward to like the 1920s, and then 1970s, and then now like current time, and then the near future and the far future. And what happens is you get the first half of the first story, and then you get the first half of the second story, and third and fourth and fifth, and then it goes back down. So you end back in the 19th century where you started. It's a really, really lovely voyage into the power of voice. Each of these stories has its own distinct voice. It's just some of the most amazing stuff I've ever read. I do have to say, this is a fairly polarizing book. I read it for one of my courses for my degree, and it was the most polarizing and contentious book in discussions. I've also recommended it to a lot of my friends and family, and none of them have finished it. Although, no, I think my mom finished it, but she didn't love it. So just keep that in mind. I guess not everybody likes it. I don't know why. What's next? Next, we have The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This is an amazing book. It's what turned me on to the classics. The writing is so fluid and the plot clips along. It's like the most thrillery thriller ever, but with the most poetic prose. And I mean, look, it's not a thin book. It's like 1,200 pages, but they zip along like a hurricane is ripping through the pages. It's really, really awesome. I devoured this book when I read it in my mid-20s. I woke up and reached for it and read it before breakfast. I read it on the train to wherever I was going. Any minute I had available, it was in my hands. I read it all the time. Like, I would fall asleep with it. I would read it until my eyes demanded I go to sleep. It's about a merchant sailor who gets routed, and he is imprisoned unjustly, and his whole life is taken away, and it's about what he does to recover from that and who he becomes. It's about, oh my God, it's just like, it's about trauma and diligence and dedication and revenge and letting go and moving on. It's about living. It's about a life. It's about a life. It's so amazing. I love this book. Mwah. Next, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. If you haven't read this, it's a little bit like the TV show. They both start with the same premise of this religious sect that has taken over the United States and implemented very, very strict rules about how people live. Well, you probably know exactly what it is. But there are not a lot of children being born, and so in order to combat this, or for many other reasons, the government of Gilead, this new nation, takes women they think are fertile and they bestow them onto men of influence and power, basically to be breeding stock or sex slaves. The book is from the point of view of one of these women, these handmaids, and it is a horrifying and beautiful and cynical and optimistic read. As you read it, you start to feel like you're watching this woman slowly and steadily lose her mind, and you get to realize that she kind of wants to. It's poetic and brutal and tragic, and it's, if you haven't read it, I would say make it the first thing on this list to read. Next up, Jitterbug Perfume by Tom Robbins. This is a romp through time and space and thought. Tom Robbins maintains that he writes sober, but I find it really hard to believe that he didn't at least eat some questionable mushrooms before he sat down to write this. It's so great. The book is full of humor with a capital H. It's full of meditations on mortality and immortality and the meaning of life. It's really, really awesome. The prose are rich and decadent, and as silly as they are poetic. It's like eating a Thanksgiving dinner at a pop-up restaurant in a Middle Eastern bazaar. And it stood the test of time with me personally. I read this when I was in my early 20s, mid-20s, and then I read it again in my 30s, and I just really can't wait until I get a chance to read it again. Next up, A Gentleman in Moscow. If I had to describe this book in one word, I would say charming, but I'm really glad that I don't have to describe it in one word because it's so much more than that. It is charming. Everything about it is charming. Count Rostov, the protagonist, is charming. The narrative voice is charming. The whole structure of it is charming. But charm is only the first level of the enjoyment of this thing. It's about this aristocrat in Russia during the Communist Revolution, and he is basically sequestered. He's sort of under house arrest at this hotel, and it's about his life there and how he makes a family out of it and makes a life out of it. In one of my courses in my degree, we talked about the concept of a clockwork universe. A clockwork universe is a story where everything in it, every element of it, its setting, its plot, its characters, its voice, everything ricochets and resounds off of each other and pulls meaning from each other. So everything sort of fits inside this clockwork. And Gentleman in Moscow is the most fully realized clockwork universe that I can think of. And it leads to a very, very satisfying conclusion. It's a great book. Up next, we have Ernest Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea. This is another short one. It's 126 pages, but wow, does it pack a punch. I feel like Hemingway always does that. It feels like he's pummeling you in the chest with his prose. I've read a few things by him. So in this, you are following Santiago, the old man, on a 3-day struggle with a giant marlin that he's trying to bring in. The prose are exquisite. You float on them as Santiago floats on the sea. The pace ebbs and flows. It dances between the slowness of Santiago's thoughts and the action of his struggle with the marlin. You come to realize that the sea is his friend and his enemy and his lover and his mother and his son, and you come to find that he is the sea. There's a famous quote by William Faulkner about Hemingway, and it goes, "He has never been known to use a word that might cause the reader to check with a dictionary to see if it's properly used." It was meant as a criticism, and although I do agree with the truth of the content, I don't agree with the sentiment of criticism. Since when was the mark of a great writer the number of times a reader had to open a dictionary? That doesn't make sense to me. I mean, one evening of reading Hemingway will show even the most verbose person that you don't need SAT words to make poetry. The line rose slowly and steadily, and then the surface of the ocean bulged ahead of the boat, and the fish came out. He came out unendingly, and water poured from his sides. He was bright in the sun, and his head and back were dark purple, and in the sun the stripes on his sides showed wide and a light lavender. His sword was as long as a baseball bat and tapered like a rapier, and he rose his full length from the water and then re-entered it, smoothly like a diver, and the old man saw the great scythe blade of his tail go under, and the line commenced to race out. I mean, come on. There isn't a single word I have to look up, but the whole paragraph is music. The word "and" is used 13 times, and I relish every one of them. The long sentence about the fish's snout is a run-on, but who cares? Who cares? It's gorgeous. We're talking about fishing here, and I can't get enough of it. This is such a really amazing book. If you have wanted to read Hemingway and you haven't, this is a really great one to start with, and it's so super short. Lastly, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. If I had to choose a favorite book of all time, this would be a front runner. It is a unique and deeply moving masterpiece. It's a sort of stream of consciousness of a time and place. The narrative hands off from character to character, and it rambles and swirls around these like thoughts and ideas. Like there is, things do happen, but mostly what you're reading are the thoughts and the observations of the characters as the narrative sort of like jumps from person to person throughout this whole thing. It follows this family named the Ramsays on some of their visits to the Isle of Skye in Scotland. I don't know how Virginia Woolf wrote this, but it's beautiful and scorchingly profound. It's one of the few things that makes me think that maybe there is a higher power, because it's really hard for me to understand how a mortal hand could have done this without guidance from something greater. It's beautiful and moving and meaningful and deeply and universally true. It's just so amazing. If you haven't read it, please read it and take your time with it. It's one you really kind of want to relish. So there you go. Those are my top 10 favorite books. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. What are your top 10 favorite books? Do you like any of these? Do you hate any of these? I would love to hear what you have to say about it. I'm going to have another video up here pretty soon. I just finished a book, and I'm going to do a little quick thoughts about it. But that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.